You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. Every week, we talk to leaders within the biohealth capital region. For those who are regular listeners, you know that we had a Virginia theme with the last BioTalk with John Newby and Nikki Hastings and Amy Adams. And we're keeping with the Virginia theme this week because someone that is relatively new to this biohealth capital region in Virginia Tech, we're going to talk to Dr. Brett Malone, who's the CEO of Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Brett, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be here.
A lot of listeners probably don't get down that far south in our region, and we're trying to bring the southern part of our region to our listeners up north. Today, we're going to focus on educating people about all the good things going on down there that they're not aware of.
We're trying to bring the CRC to Northern Virginia, so that's a good match. We're excited to be partnering.
And the CRC you're referring to is the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center, which we'll refer to as CRC from now on during the podcast, makes it easier. I think it would be good for the listeners to learn about you and what brought you to Virginia Tech and become the CEO of the CRC.
It's no great surprise to your listeners probably. I'm a Virginia Tech Hokie. So I'm a graduate in 1995, did my PhD in aerospace engineering. As part of that journey, way back in the 80s, I co-opted at the Martin Marietta facility up in Baltimore. No stranger to the capital region, also worked at the Martin Marietta corporate headquarters there in Bethesda. So my background, I did a PhD in aerospace engineering, spent about 10 years in a career developing software and did my first startup company right out of grad school in 95. I came over to the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center in 95. I have the CRC DNA in me for the last 25 years. So now your listeners are probably wondering, what's an aerospace engineer doing on a biotech podcast? I made a career shift about 15 years ago or so and moved into bioinformatics, informatics, and a lot of this integration of software and genomics, and spent the second half of my career somewhat on the road working in the biotech industry. I did 2 additional startups in cancer diagnostics, and I was funded out of Fort Detrick, started a company with the University of Pennsylvania, partner of mine, out of that funding. So I'm no stranger to the 270 corridor as well. Spent some time and lived in Rockville. I really got involved in a lot of technologies around diagnostics, oncology, and therapeutics. Ultimately ended up in San Francisco with a Google Ventures-backed company called Freenome. That was just a fantastic integration of artificial intelligence, genomics, and early detection of cancer, colorectal cancer. That was my last project. And I got a call from the University Search Committee, and they said, hey, we think you'd be a good fit for the CRC. Have such a diverse background in consulting, startups, well, engineering degree, but also working for years in the biotech industry. I was fortunate enough to step into this role in July of last year, and it's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it ever since.
Well, that's quite a transition and quite a background. To be honest with you, most people don't train for these types of positions that you and I have. You evolve into them based on your experience. And as you say, sometimes a headhunter comes out of the sky and says, hey, you'd be perfect. And you said, what? I'm going to be perfect to go into the academic setting after being an entrepreneur for all this time. So talk a little bit about that transition from what you did last into the environment you're in now. And what are the major challenges and changes you had to go through to adapt your way of thinking?
Well, it's really a cool position because I get to sit on the outside of the university, but really help and support and cultivate the startup community. But we are a private entity held underneath the Virginia Tech Foundation. So the foundation manages the endowment. So the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center has a campus of 36 buildings. We have 225 companies in our campus. And we have an enterprise also that spreads out to Newport News. And as you very well know, we're very anxious to expand into Northern Virginia. So the answer to your question, what I'm really enjoying about the position is the opportunity to see all the diverse technologies. not just biotech, life sciences, but one day you're talking quantum computing, the next day you're talking sensors and photonics, and the next day you're talking bioprinting. We just have an incredible community of innovators. We have over 3,500 people here at our corporate facility. What I'm really finding is there's a tremendous opportunity to take that culture into other areas and really help expand that research, that innovation field.
Some people have difficulty adjusting from an entrepreneurial background to an academic background because sometimes you get caught up in some processes and bureaucracies and things that you're not accustomed to, especially around decision making. So you being a separate, independent entity outside of the university environment, lessen that challenge a little bit?
Well, it's still a much bigger organization, and I'm part of a much bigger enterprise, if you will. We are here to support the university's startup commercialization efforts. We're not exclusively in that role. So what we find is, sure, being an academic environment, things don't move as fast as a 50-person startup. But at the same time, what we're finding is you can cultivate a lot of relationships. What I'm really been most refreshed by is my network out on the road. The folks who I've worked with over the last 25 years have been really welcoming of the opportunity to understand what's going on in the park and how they can help. We're adding to our board of directors from some of that network to bring a fresh outside perspective in. As you could imagine, stepping into this role, there's a bit of a phase shift, if you will, but it just means you get to do more in the pipeline. It's sort of like juggling scarves.
Well, that's a pretty good analogy and a visual too.
They don't move very fast, but you can put a few more balls in the air and have a bigger pipeline.
Why don't we talk a little bit about what you see as your primary mission and what your day job consists of, primarily in being the CEO of the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center?
As I mentioned, we're a campus of 36 buildings, over 225 companies. We are primarily research and technology-based companies. So we have computing, we have a heavy presence of autonomous vehicles. One of our flagship companies, Torque, is here. We also have a strong complement of device and instrumentation and diagnostics companies. So Intuitive Surgical is one of our prime tenants and a variety of others. So to answer your question, a lot of this has to do, in my position, with first setting the direction and the strategy for growth. Where are we going in the post-COVID world? How do I look at expanding the enterprise beyond Blacksburg? Blacksburg has been incredibly successful over the last 30 years. Our primary mission being adjacent to the university, we have been expanding, but the face of university research parks will be changing post-COVID, all of the other technology changes that are going on. So setting the strategy, leading the team, and helping the team understand what the next 30 years is going to look like. That involves stakeholders at the university. One of the things that I'm really excited and a fun part of my job is being part of the University R&D Council, if you will. So helping understand what are the core strengths of the university, and then how do we align our commercialization efforts to play off of that? So as they move and transition from basic research to translational research, and then ultimately into commercialized opportunities, having an understanding of that pipeline is really important for my job.
You talk about three important areas with research, technology transfer, and then commercialization. Talk about who's responsible for what roles and how does that interaction occur, and at what time do you get involved in the process?
I've spent a lot of time integrating and really coming up to speed and plugging into all the university programs. Brandy Salmon runs a great program at Link License Launch. As an investigator and an entrepreneur comes out of the university, they're somewhat the last office, and then I get a call from their office, and I'm somewhat the first opportunity that investigator moves into. So I get a chance to talk to these early investigators, and as well working with some of the advancement group to understand how can we recruit and bring outside companies to the park. We've been ramping up a lot of our recruiting to bring companies here and to plug in and get close to the action. In the old days, it used to be, hey, come here and build a building and get close to the action. Now we're creating more of a virtual relationship with these companies, and that's really been received well.
You talk about virtual. I would imagine the pandemic's changed a little bit the manner of which you're operating day to day. And then you talk about the strategies for 30 years into the future. Once you figure those out, please tell me what they are because it'll make my job easier. Brett, talk a little bit about what impact has the pandemic had on your day-to-day operations?
It actually has forced me to focus quite a bit. So our software companies are working from home. We have really not suffered too much of a degradation. We're running at about 92.5% occupancy. We haven't suffered a huge loss of tenant base, frankly, because of the quality of life here in Blacksburg and the nature of the companies we have. Now, to dive into that a little more, the software companies are still working from home. But here's the secret, and this is why it's important for this conversation. Our labs are 100% occupied. Our lab space and our researchers are working in the labs. And what we're finding is, to answer your question, how does it shape my development strategy? We're building more labs. We're building more research space. We're building more utility space where we can do physical testing. And those are things that you just can't do at home. You can't do that at the kitchen table over Zoom. The short-term impact has given me a chance to observe the dynamics that are really the key value proposition of the park. It's shaping our growth strategy to develop in that direction. We're really building space that people need, even in a pandemic, because you just can't do those kind of things at the kitchen table, like I said.
You're building space that's needed throughout the whole biohealth capital region right now because the whole biohealth life science industry is one of the only ones that is really fully working, as you say, in their spaces because they can't do it at home. But we have a challenge right now. We have very little spec space or small wet lab space available. And if you had a big company that wanted to come in, I would imagine even to your location or Montgomery County or Northern Virginia or Baltimore or wherever, and they said, well, we need 100,000 square feet. There aren't a lot of spaces in Maryland, DC, or Virginia that could accommodate them. So developers, I think, are having to understand they're going to have to do some speculative building. And it sounds like you're doing that down in Blacksburg right now.
We are. As a matter of fact, we are exploring, and there's really three trends going on in the industry that makes us relevant. One is understanding what a small company needs, create space that can be collaborative, co-working space, shared lab space. So we're seeing that really as a trend. What puts us on the map, in my opinion, there are three trends that are really in our favor. One is, as you know, with Virginia Tech's presence in Northern Virginia in Alexandria, there's a big development curriculum around AI and machine learning. So AI and machine learning is really lowering the cost of discovery. It's lowering the cost of this early, let's say, replacing high throughput screening with more of an in silico approach. That's one advantage because it lowers the capital requirements for a company. And then two, what you hit on is exactly right. Lab space is in big demand, but the model has to change. For one company to take on a big lab space with just one small NCI grant, for example, it's really a risky proposition for that startup. So what we're doing is we're creating co-working spaces. It's working out really well. We have a separate co-working space that we launched back in October. We've got 30 members. We've expanded that. That really insulates the model. What we're also seeing in commercial real estate development, commercial real estate is more interested in investing in biotech right now. The life sciences, biotech labs, that's where the money's going. Investors are getting into that space because, frankly, the office space is work from home. So we're leveraging that. We're getting developers and investors excited about building, and they're excited because that's the hot space. The third piece, just to round this out, big pharma partners, and even incubate large nationally known incubator programs such as JLabs. What we're seeing is they're more willing to partner on a virtual basis. So they're willing to make their programming available, bring programming into a place like Blacksburg, where traditionally you'd be competing with Boston, San Francisco, and New York. That content has been pushed online. It's been pushed and made virtual. And now bigger companies are realizing they can get access to places like Blacksburg, whereas in the past, they may have overlooked us as an opportunity. So we're leveraging those three dynamics.
Space becomes a little more flexible right now. And when you mention the co-working spaces, we were involved with Alexandria Real Estate in launch labs up in Montgomery County. And what we did as an economic development organization is we leased one of the labs for ourselves so that we could get 2 to 3 small companies who couldn't afford to get into 1,000 square feet because they only needed 250 or they needed one bench. What we've done, though, is if you have a pandemic going on and you have people utilizing the same space and they're all doing different things, it comes a little more challenging. So I think that's going to be one of the trends of the future. How do you do co-working space to make certain that you have a safe working environment for everybody that's going to be sharing that same space? And I'm sure there's ways to do that.
Part of our operating protocol is to make sure that we're really amping up a lot of our sanitation, if you will. We're on rotating schedules. So, and you hit the nail on the head too. A lot of this comes down to people needing a bench and access to some wet facilities. So what we're finding is we can schedule things in a more flexible manner. As people move back into work, get more comfortable, we're going to continually manage that. So I think we're going to see some scheduling offsets. We're going to see flexibility. But the economics of it are too good to pass up. A small startup who needs a bench, that's very attractive and people are willing to pay for that. These are things that can be built into grants. You know how a lot of these NCI, SBIR funded companies get off the ground. It's really important to give them that opportunity. If you miss them during that phase, you're likely not to get them when they get bigger. You know, they're going to win another grant and then they're going to raise some capital. And pretty soon, they've got $30 million, but they're not really interested in a relationship with you anymore.
And when you talk about services you provide to some of these small companies other than space, talk a little bit about some of the other things you do for the small companies. And then we take equity in some of the ones we work with because we have a for-profit subsidiary. Has CRC ventured into becoming an equity partner with some of the companies you work with that may have spun out of VT?
We don't take equity. A lot of the services have to do with connections, networking. We have a program called the Concierge Service where we're on an actively outreaching to industry. And what we find is with 220 some companies, a large company like a Pfizer or Novartis, they have no idea what's going on here. So we act as a concierge to do that matchmaking. And the small companies don't have the personnel to do that. So that's a welcome service. What we're also seeing is the ecosystem around Virginia Tech, especially around life sciences, we have a dedicated investment fund. So the CRC doesn't take equity, but the foundation in relationship with a private entity, we have the Virginia Tech Fund that can seed these startups. So we do have mechanisms to provide equity financing for some of these smaller startups, anything related to Virginia Tech. And in some cases, investments have been made in companies in Northern Virginia that have been started by Hokies, for example.
You're very fortunate to have that because that's one of the most critical gaps that exist today with some of these emerging entrepreneurs. But you keep referencing Northern Virginia. So let's talk a little bit about this and your migration north. Virginia Tech starting to make a name for themselves as they migrate north into Northern Virginia and beyond, maybe, because you're actually into DC too. So talk about the new Amazon campus that's up there. Talk a little bit about what's going on at Walter Reed in partnership with Children's, and what is the CRC relationship or interaction to those entities, and how do you see that growing?
The Innovation Campus is a $1 billion investment between the state of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and we're excited about the academic prospects to create that pipeline of students. What I see is the opportunity, that pipeline of students creates those AI, machine learning, educated talent. A lot of it, first and foremost, starts with talent. We will have a relationship with the Innovation Campus. We're getting the academic programs and the academic building up and running first. So that's going to be a few years out before we see a commercial footprint there for us. That said, there's a lot of opportunity to connect CRC companies. And so for us to have a footprint, whether it's at Walter Reed or Children's or other locations, the value of that is we have a strong talent pool in Blacksburg, but we don't have all of the resources such as regulatory personnel, having proximity to solid project management associated with NCI or the FDA. So getting close to the agencies is important. Several of our companies in Blacksburg have leveraged that model. So Landos, for example, has a big operation here at the CRC, but they also establish talent and they recruit and maintain leadership in Northern Virginia, particularly to be close to the agency and get access to the regulatory talent. And so it's not really an expansion and moving off and creating another island. It's really complementing the enterprise. And so where we can help companies grow here and in the capital region. That's really the goal.
And do you think the CRC growth north or in whatever direction will be an affiliation with existing other VT related entities or having dedicated CRC spaces that you might have that would be an extension of what you're doing in Blacksburg?
I think it's both. One is, as you know, Virginia Tech has a beautiful research facility in Arlington, and the foundation owns that building. And so the CRC has access to relationships there. So where we can be an extension through those facilities, we already have that as part of the network. But what we also see is an opportunity to expand the brand into the region so that companies that are in Blacksburg feel like they have a home in Northern Virginia. I know when I was doing a lot of my startup companies, I never really had an office in Northern Virginia, DC, or Maryland, but it would have been nice. It's nice to be able to say we've got a location here. As part of the expansion of the enterprise, giving a home for our Blacksburg companies in your region, in the Northern Virginia region, adds credibility to some of the smaller startups. They get closer to venture capital, they get closer to regulatory expertise. And so it's a value add even for our smaller tenants here in Blacksburg.
When you say even where I am, well, basically, Brett, I'm part of the BioHealth Capital Region. So just like you're coming north, we're going south. But at the end of the day, it's always been there, but we didn't have the connectivity with resources like yourself to really fully engage in creating a meaningful relationship or partnership with people. You know, we dealt with Virginia Bio, and we still deal with John Newby very well. We started working as our anchor with Inova in Northern Virginia when they were going to build their precision medicine campus, and then all of a sudden had a change in leadership. So that was almost for like us, it's a restart in Virginia because they had such big plans. And now I think we're just starting to cultivate new relationships, which we think can be long-term in nature with those that have staying power and share the mission and goals for the region.
That's what's exciting for me is there's so much opportunity, but I think there's been a lot of investment trying to grow Blacksburg. President Tim Sands at the university has done a lot of work to establish that brand in Northern Virginia. There's no shortage of Virginia Tech grads who are very passionate about the brand and seeing the university and all of its capabilities come. It's not really to compete and take over things. It's actually to complement and add value to. And that's really the mindset. And whether we're coming to add value to pharma or researchers in Northern Virginia, Maryland, that whole area, or the relationships we establish, if we can bring some of that connectivity back to Blacksburg and help grow our companies, it's win-win.
Talk a little bit about your interaction with like UVA and George Mason, because we haven't had a lot of interaction with UVA. And I know that there's competition for lots of different things amongst all institutions within Virginia or Maryland or wherever they may be. But what do you see as the natural synergies for collaboration amongst the academic institutions in Virginia?
As you know very well, you mentioned John Newby. The BioConnect project, I think, is a great way to look at tying these regions together. And so I'm really excited to be participating in that. We are building labs. We were part of BioConnect as part of our in-kind contribution. We've got lab space that we're going to be developing. We're going to look to bring entrepreneurs and residents programs in. But the cool thing about it is you'll see some of these EIRs are going to be rotating around regions in Virginia. So we're Region 2. We might have an investigator in Region 5 that could really benefit from some kind of expertise that we have here, whether it's someone out of Mike Friedlander's group or whomever. That's what I see as the opportunity, because ultimately the research and what a company might be pursuing in biotech, it really goes across all those boundaries.
You mentioned the term EIR. We have a number of EIRs and we have a definition for them. How do you view the EIRs as you refer to it?
Just the entrepreneurs and residents and the ability to bring expertise and management experience into the mix. I mean, I can be honest, I think I'm an EIR in terms of coming back into this ecosystem. And it's a fun job, really, because I get people coming to me saying, hey, I want to start a company. I've been in a lab. Really, you have to walk them through the very basics. Opening some doors, helping them understand what landmines not to step on. A lot of that's important. And I think that's really the network that needs to be cultivated even more strongly, because what you see in other regions, if you think about the Bay Area, if you think about even Boulder, for example, this strong community of people who have been there, done that, but then they give back to community. The culture of receiving entrepreneurs back into the community, celebrating entrepreneurs taking risks. We have a motto at the CRC. We're undergoing a major rebranding initiative. I don't want to spill the beans too much here, but it's called Start Disrupting. And we look at a lot of what our people are doing is disrupting an industry, an economy, a technology, all for the best, all for the positive. They're risk takers. So a long way to answer this question, these risk takers have to be made to feel comfortable that if they don't make it, they'll be received back into the community. And it's so important. And sometimes an EIR can give that motivation in certain ways that others can't. You feel like you're on the line if you're talking to an investor. Folks who are mentors, advisors, people who are in the trenches with the entrepreneur, they can encourage and also make these folks feel comfortable to think big. That's our biggest challenge right now, is we just have to lead and motivate people to think as big as they possibly can.
Well, I won't tell anybody about Start Disrupting. None of our listeners will mention a word about it, Brett. Let's talk a little bit about what you see as your short and intermediate term goals for CRC, and what would be some of the personal goals that you have for yourself related to this new position?
The lab space development is really an involved process. For us, we see taking advantage of that, what we call space with purpose. Development strategy is important, and how do we develop space with purpose for our entrepreneurs? That's really key. That's a part of our vision that we're focusing on. And frankly, we're also looking at new ways to develop integrated space, more amenities, and it gets down to what's the experience. People want to live, work, play. We've got a great development project and a partnership at Newport News at Tech Center. Tech Center really demonstrates that model, and we're excited to bring it back. But we develop apartments, we develop a complex with Whole Foods, and we've got a research campus that sits right in the middle of that. And it's also adjacent to Jefferson National Labs. And so that combination of ingredients really makes that culture develop. So for me, personally, it's seeing that community of leaders evolve, creating an experience for them that keeps them here and attracts more, and really giving back to the community. I remember when I came over here in 1995, I didn't know thing one. We had a great community of people that came in and said, well, here's what you do. And we just got started. We had some great people, great leaders. My predecessor, Joe Meredith, did a great job of creating an environment of opening doors, networking. So for me personally, giving back both at the university level and professionally as part of the industry level, it's really motivating.
That sounds inspirational, Brett, and you sound motivated in what you're doing. And I guess one of the keys would be is I was a newbie when I came into this region about 10 years ago, and you're not a newbie, but yet you're into a new role. So I would say to you, how can BioHealth Innovation or the BioHealth Capital Region help support you in what your goals and growth objectives are?
Being able to connect and help people understand what value we have here is important. And also, I think being able to connect the talent pipeline. There's people in the Capital Region and the Northern Virginia region, Maryland, that can really add a lot of value. What I'm seeing also is the shift in working. More people are moving into what you might consider the gig economy, if you will, and there's going to be more consultants, there's more network of professionals. I think that's important because I don't think our companies leverage that kind of network enough. And so to answer your question, certainly having you involved in understanding what our strategy is for your region and how we're developing that space with purpose, and then having the relationship with other partners who are part of that enterprise. And then finally, as we think about the talent pipeline, really helping, encouraging, motivate people to take a look and get involved.
By the way, it's our region.
That's right. Yeah.
What is there that you'd like to let the BioTalk listeners know that we haven't talked about that is something that you think is important for them to learn about CRC?
We're excited about this strategy of developing AI machine learning, so the computing side, our ability to drive the cost down. We're really passionate and excited about demonstrating that We welcome any and all input in terms of partnerships. So we are actively looking to develop partnerships in all areas. You mentioned the wet lab space, but also the virtual partnerships, where a bigger company may be interested in getting involved, and AstraZeneca interested in getting involved to get close to the action. And now we can leverage everything through Zoom and really make that available. So the opportunity to make some of our brightest, youngest investigators, disruptors, if you will, putting them on center stage. What's exciting for me is being a brand ambassador for these companies. And that's what I take most seriously about this role. At the end of the day, I have a tremendous amount of pride driving into the park in the morning. And when I leave the park in the evening, I'm always thinking about, well, what can I do to help this company? How do I become a better brand ambassador for all 225 of our companies?
I love the term brand ambassador. Hopefully, we can extend your brand ambassading to include the BioHealth Capital Region in the future. We're going to do everything we can do to help support you and get you integrated up north, as you say, to the extent you want to. And then hopefully you'll do the same for me to get me associated and connected with people down south in Blacksburg and all around you in that area. But it's been enjoyable to get to know more about what's going on at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. We've had the pleasure of having Dr. Brett Malone, who's the CEO and has been there a whole 6 months now, is going to be taking over the world based on those goals. And I think, to be honest with you, when you talk about quantum computing and artificial intelligence, I like to talk about the convergence of technologies that's occurring right now. That's why we use the term biohealth rather than biotech or life sciences. It's the convergence of the technology that gets associated with the bio, the pharma, the medical device, electronic medical records, and everything else, where everything becomes interdependent. And Virginia Tech has a great deal of expertise and resources that can help that convergence happen.
To see the curriculum changing to where now it's not just you study AI. AI now horizontally cuts across all disciplines. So if you're an aerospace engineer or if you're a molecular biologist, you're going to be learning about AI. And you're right. The experience I got at Freenome to see how machine learning teams were side by side with molecular biologists and sequencing teams, that was just fascinating. And that could not have been a better demonstration of that integration of technologies.
And that's one of your three big trends that we all have to embrace these days. Brett, thank you very much. I'm sorry that I can't meet with you when you're coming up to meet up in Montgomery County as you are in the next couple of days. But one of these days this year, we'll have a chance to have a face-to-face. And hopefully we can get you involved in our BioHealth Capital Region Forum and our investment conference that you got a brief introduction to back in October of last year. Brett, thanks a lot for being on BioTalk.
Thanks, Rich. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.